So good day and welcome to the first episodes of CDI Talks. My name is Anton Shekhovtsov and I am the chair of the Center for Democratic Integrity, a non-profit organization based in Austria. Our organization monitors and analyzes attempts of authoritarian regimes to influence politics, societies and public governance in Europe. My guest today is John Færseth. He's a Norwegian author, a freelance journalist. He's considered one of Norway's top experts on conspiracy theories. His first book, Conspira Norge, which can be translated as Conspiracy Norway, was published in 2013, and the second updated edition of the book came out in 2017. Due to his profound knowledge of conspiracy theories, Norwegian media engages with John as an expert and commentator in this field. In spring 2014, John spent a lot of time in Ukraine, meeting and interviewing people involved in the Euromaidan, and later also people involved in the Russian-supported uprising in eastern Ukraine. In result, he published his book, Ukraine, the Country on the Border, in 2014, discussing the historical background of the Ukrainian revolution and the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Putin's Russia has come into focus of John's most recent book, The Lighthouse in the East, Putin's Russia and Western Extremism, published earlier this year, which is the main topic of our talk today. So, Jon, first of all, could you please tell us a little bit more about your previous books, namely on the conspiracy theories and Ukraine? To what extent did those books or the research that you did while writing those two books inform your most recent one?
Well, first of all, as you just said, my first book was about conspiracy theories. And you might say that that was also very much what led me into an interest in political extremism, because I see more and more how important role conspiracy theories actually play in most, extremist ideologies these days, and probably always have. And of course, my interest in Ukraine led me pretty soon after the book was done to get an interest in the foreign fighters that started to come to Donetsk and Luhansk to fight for the separatists. I interviewed some of them. I got very, very intrigued about what they said, specifically about their worldview, basically. They would talk about how this was a fight against the United States, how this was a fight against the global powers, how this was a fight about the powers that wanted to impose liberal ideology on Ukraine, and of course, eventually in Russia and the world. And some of them even started to talk about that, but the US was not really to blame. It was all the globalists. It was George Soros. It was the powers even behind him that was behind everything. And that intrigued me. I started really to delve into the ideology of many of them. I started to read a lot of material from various organizations. And of course, that was really how this book began.
Talking about your most recent book that you published, The Lighthouse in the East, if that is correct translation. I know it was only published now in Norwegian. As the title of the book suggests, Western extremists are attracted to Russia. But what specifically fascinates far-right and far-left forces with Putin's Russia? Well,
let's start with the far-rights. To me, it appears that it's very much that they are very, very deeply opposed to the current, to what they perceive as the current world order, which is Western-dominated or US-dominated and dominated by liberal values like multiculturalism, like LGBT rights, and so on. Some are even dissatisfied with democracy or disillusioned with democracy. And they are, in a way, a slogan that used to be used by the Norwegian left is another world is possible. And it's in some ways, I like to sort of appropriate that slogan because I think it's so very, 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 very descriptive of how those people see the world. They want a different world, a world which is not dominated by what they see as destructive forces. And they are sort of creating an image in their minds of Russia as the country who is standing up against all this, the country who is still standing for conservative values. And country that is going its own way, not being directed by the EU or by the NATO or by the IMF and so forth. And of course, it can be argued how true this picture is, but this is how they view Russia. And it becomes sort of like an image of everything, or like a lighthouse that stands for everything that they want instead. And of course, this fits very, very well with how Russia portrays itself as being surrounded by the West, with the West trying to foment the color revolution in Russia and so forth. So it's sort of like that sort of strengthens their picture of Russia even more. It fits really well into each other. That's really the short version of it. Now, to some leftists, I wouldn't say there are many of them, but there are some who also has a very kind of reflexive anti-imperialism, where they tend to blame the US particularly, and to some extent also Europe, for basically everything that goes wrong in the world. And if there is an uprising somewhere, like we saw in Ukraine, or like we see now in Belarus, or like the Arab Spring and so forth, it is always has to be some kind of Western plot for regime change. And then maybe we should support the forces that are against the West anyway. They're not many, but they exist.
Well, you already mentioned that basically it's how the far right and the far left, how they view Russia, which does not necessarily mean that the Russia that they have in mind, that it actually exists. So for me, I think it was fascinating how they interpret, even for themselves, the fact that Putin himself states that Russia is a multicultural, it's a multi-ethnic entity, that Islam is one of the 4 traditional religions in Russia. But how do they explain this to themselves?
I have actually never seen anyone, haven't seen very many who is trying to even explain this. I think they are just sort of like blocking it out as something that doesn't fit in their worldview. A good example of this would be, the Norwegian mass murderer and terrorist Anders Behring Breivik, for instance. In his manifesto, he writes a lot about Russia, and he obviously isn't aware of that Islam is considered one of the traditional religions in Russia. Of course, maybe some of it might have to do with the war in Chechnya, and they sort of view that as a war against Islam, which I don't think is right, even if, no, I don't support the war against Chechnya, but even if you supported it, I don't think that would be a good explanation of it at all.
And also the question, of course, arises about the far left. Well, Russia is a hyper-capitalist country where social inequality is, I think, even compared to the West, is quite shocking.
It is, but it's sort of like even a wrong reading of Leninism and anti-imperialism, because anti-imperialism, that's something that most or all great powers are doing, and which, of course, from a leftist point of view would be wrong, and most people will see it as wrong. But as you said, to some people, imperialism becomes something that only the West, and particularly the US, is doing. And I think that also goes for how some of them view China. They can't really see that other forces are just as bad or worse.
Actually, the Chinese issue is quite an interesting one, I guess, because in some European countries, we already see that authoritarian leaders such as Viktor Orban are sort of trying to engage with China, and at the same time distancing from Brussels and from pro-European neighbors. Is there anything like this happening in Norway?
I wouldn't say that there's very much of this. There isn't really even a very strong, pro-Kremlin movement in Norway at all, I would say. There are some outliers here and there, and they tend to, for some reason, to sort of find together with each other. But with China, I think that China is something that is probably really up and coming now. And if you look at, for instance, how Russia is using, conspiracy theories, fake news, and so on to manipulate the media and opinion in the West, I think China will soon be coming after them and start doing the same. And I think they might be even doing a better job than Russia is doing, unfortunately.
And what do you think that could be attractive in Norway for China?
Well, first of all, we we are a rich country, we are an oil-producing country, energy supplier, we are a big supplier of fish, everything else. So, and also, I mean, we are located on, we have a very, very interesting location. I mean, being having a coast right out to the Atlantic Ocean. We have lots of areas of influence in the Arctic, which is of course of great interest to China, and where they would probably have a lot of interests coming up, like in Spitsbergen and so on. So trying to make a good relationship with Norway for China would of course be very, very interesting, and of course also. And of course, also, there are many politicians, unfortunately, in Norway who are very, very reluctant to engage negatively with China, very much because of the export markets that we have there. So I could see a lot of attempts at influencing Norway from China in the future, definitely. I mean, there has been attempts from Russia also to influence, but they haven't really been that successful. Maybe China could be far more successful than that. I don't know.
And what are those instances of Russia trying to influence politics in Norway?
Well, as I said, there are no real pro-Kremlin parties in Norway except for some outlying far kind of rightist Christian parties, and of course the far right. But there are some elements here and there, both on the left, where some people can take their anti-imperialism a bit too far, like basically blaming everything that happened in Ukraine on the West is a very typical one. You can also see some people in the Progress Party who are basically doing the same, calling for recognition of Crimea as Russian, for instance. But influence, I think there has been some attempts in another way. For instance, you have some web pages that are that have a rather big readership, that are both on the right and on the left. It's alternative media, who has been running articles that have been very defensive, for instance, of particularly Russia than their activities in Syria. They have, for instance, they have been denying gas attacks. They are claiming that Assad and Putin are simply fighting Islamists and so on. And of course, this has been it's sort of been connected to the refugee crisis and so on. You are sort of saying that, they are just trying to create order in the Middle East, so we don't get more illegal migrants in Norway, for instance. That's been a very typical way of reasoning. As for that, by the way, this media, it's pretty interesting to see how they really became part of Russia's influence operations surrounding Syria, in the sense that when Russia first got involved in Syria, I think it was in 2013, I might remember wrong with the year, but anyway, what has been shown was that they very soon started to involve a bunch of people who had a background basically in the tinfoil hat world of conspiracy theories. We are talking people who used to speak of chemtrails, vaccines, I think even one of them even was on a podcast about abominable snowmen. It was people like that, and of course they were anti-Semites. One had been in panels with Holocaust deniers. Another one claimed that the Islamic State was in reality run by Israel, and that the Caliph was an Israeli actor. But anyway, those people were lifted up by Russia. They were given, they were presented as expert journalists, commentators, and so forth. They were taken to Russia to meet with several people in the Russian Foreign Ministry, in Russia Today, and so on. They were sent to Syria as part of delegations to regime-controlled parts of Syria. And when they returned, they would start to write comments and articles and so forth for Russia Today, of course, the Russian English language propaganda broadcaster. And it seems like what was very important was that they were going to do a smear campaign against the White Helmets. The Syria Civil Defense, I think, is the real name of it. the organization that has been rescuing people out of bombed buildings and also documenting war crimes from the regime and from the Russians. They were basically doing a big campaign to smear this as part of as Islamists, as terrorists. That were the West was working with. And there were even, I mean, at one time there was even somebody even rented a conference room in the UN building. They set up a person named Eva Bartlett to hold a presentation, and then this was tweeted out by the Russian Foreign Ministry as a UN conference, basically. But again, these are people that came from the conspiracy world, and in Norway they were actually also given quite a bit of attention in alternative media, especially one webpage called Steigan, which was basically rerunning all their statements about the White Helmets and about Syria. Interesting enough, some of them also later took part in the conference with Andrei Nekrasov, the guy who did the Magnitsky Act documentary, which was basically an attempt at claiming that Sergei Magnitsky, the whistleblower who died in the prison in Russia, was actually not the whistleblower at all, and he had died from natural causes. So we see. It's one of the most fascinating things about doing this is that you almost become a conspiracy theorist because you start to see so many weird connections between people.
But it's also very interesting that there were several attempts, I guess, by the Russian state-controlled media to launch something, in Scandinavia, some not necessarily TV channel, but I think the Scandinavian version of Sputnik was active for some time, although they had to close it because, well, nobody was viewing it. Nobody was reading those media.
It was active for less than a year, and as you said, I don't think anyone was interested in it. And of course, also, maybe more important, they failed to get this into the mainstream media. Nobody would quote it, which was probably what they had really been hoping for. But then Scandinavia, and especially Norway, is when you start to get interested in things like this, and in some ways, Norway feels like a very, very safe, small place, small corner of the world. Sometimes I feel that I like to compare Norway to, if you know the Lord of the Rings, the Shire. We are kind of like hobbits in the safe corner of the world who have no idea that the world is getting more dangerous around us.
Well, talking about still about these the far right and far left forces, we know that pro-Kremlin sentiments are usually found on these extremes of the political spectrum. Yeah. And it is, I think, debatable whether the Progress Party can be interpreted or can be considered as a far-right or center-right party. I remember in my first thesis that I wrote, I was still considering Progress Party, and that was more than 10 years ago, still a sort of radical right-wing populist party. I know that they have moved closer to the center, and essentially now they are accepted as the minor coalition partner for the government in Norway. But how strong are pro-Kremlin sentiments inside the Progress Party?
First of all, I would not say that the Progress Party has ever been a far-right party. They come from a sort of a different background. They started out with this kind of libertarian tax resistor guy called Anders Lange many years ago. So they come from quite a bit of a different background, although they have become more and more an anti-immigration, anti-Islam party. That's very, very true. And sometimes have been made some rather nasty statements at least by single politicians there. But I would say that pro-Kremlin sentiments are not strong in the Progress Party as today. It's a party that is very much pro-NATO, although they do not want Norway to join the EU. And although there has been some politicians from the party, including their previous leader, interesting enough, Carl I. Hagen, who actually went out and said that the West was to blame for the conflict in Ukraine and that we should recognize Crimea as Russian. But it's basically been him and one more politician. And interesting enough, they made this statement as at this biannual, I think, gathering for Norwegian Christian charismatics and Christian conservatives, which to me says a lot about the audience they expected to find there. Because that's an audience where you find some pro-Kremlin sentiments. I think it's very much connected, like in very many other countries, to the fact that Kremlin or Russia is viewed as a beacon that stands up for conservative values, considered gay rights, for instance, particularly. And it might also have some connection to the case of Norwegian child welfare, which is actually the part of the book where I really got back to Norway, because this has really been a rather big issue, I would say. It's almost been a propaganda war against Norway.
Could you please tell us more about this particular case?
I can. I would like to start with a story, actually. I first heard about this when I was in Ukraine in the spring of 2014. I happened to be in Donetsk on the day when Strelkov's guys took over Slaviansk. I was not in Slaviansk, but I was in Donetsk. And I was talking to a pro-Ukrainian woman there who told me that, oh, you should really hear what those guys over there. And she pointed at the separatists who had started to make this anti-Maidan camp around the government building of the city. You should really hear what they're saying about Norway. And I was like, really? What are they saying about Norway? Well, they are saying that your country is run by pedophiles. And they are using an organization called Barnevernet, which is, I tried to do a Russian accent about what child welfare is called in Norway. Right. And of course, because there had apparently been a lot about this in Russian TV previously. Of course, I started looking at this, and I also started to talk to people later in the Czech Republic who said that there had been a lot of controversy around Norwegian child welfare authorities there as well. They claimed that Norway was actually deliberately taking children away from East European families because we wanted to, because our genome was so bad that we actually had to sort of like refill it, just like the Nazis did with their Lebensborn program during the war. And it turned out that many of the words and expressions that was used in this controversy came directly from Russian media that had been reproduced by the blogosphere and podcast and so on in the Czech Republic. And it was the same story about Norway being connected to pedophilia and so on. And it turned out that there had been several TV programs about this in Russia, featuring a woman who used to be married to a Norwegian man. They had a child together, and when they got divorced, the man gained custody of the child, which is, of course, from Russia, probably very, very, very unusual. So she started to say that, he had been the child had been sexually abused, and this was a common custom in Norway. That goes back like to centuries back and so forth, and the government is facilitating it. And there had also been all sorts of several documentaries in Russia showing how child welfare came with police and took children away from Eastern European families, which was, of course, forged. But this found its way also to the Czech Republic and also eventually to the Baltic states. So basically, and of course, it was very much connected with LGBT rights and so on, like because obviously, to those people, I mean, homosexuality and pedophilia is basically the same. So, yeah, it's been spread. It became pretty big in the Czech Republic, and it also became pretty big in the Baltic states. And there you even had organizations that claimed to be working for family values that was working together with far-right organizations. They would work together with a Christian conservative webpage that apparently is funded by Russia. And the same people would we actually be cooperating with Norwegian anti-child welfare activists, which there are a few of. And of course, I'm not saying that Norwegian child welfare authorities are perfect, but the way it's been portrayed there is obviously something completely different. I'm not even sure, even if the Norwegian activists know who they are working with, for that matter. But yeah, they are basically taking part in propaganda, whether they know it or not.
You know, I heard about this case, and I think there were several publications indeed in the Russian media describing this absolutely crazy case. And I remember one element was in particular ridiculous. That woman claimed that that Norwegian authorities would take away those children, and they were engaging in sexual acts with them, and they also dressed those children in so-called Putin's suits, so they would look like Putin. This was so ridiculous, but I think, the more ridiculous the lie, probably the more people, believe in this, if they are, of course, into this conspiracy world.
Of course, this was originally done in order to just make the West look worse for a Russian population, probably even also smear like the opposition, saying that, okay, this is what you want to be part of. Do you really want to be like the West? And I mean, it would also be mixed with accusations that in Norway, we are teaching children in kindergarten to be gay and so forth. But it became quite ugly, especially in the Czech Republic and also in the Baltics. And I mean, you even, as I said, you sometimes feel like a conspiracy theorist yourself when you start working with this material. And I mean, I even found out that the guy who had translated this material from Russian to Czech was the son of Alexander Plekhanov, the editor of Zavtra, and then we are like not far from the environment that took part in creating the rebel republics in Ukraine.
This is fascinating, but moving away from this world of conspiracy theories, when we are looking at the more mainstream parties in Europe, the center right, the center left, not really the centrist parties, but these center right, center left, we know, but when they make more or less friendly statements about Putin's regime, they are drawing on the so-called realist approach to international relations. How widespread is this phenomenon in Norway, if any?
First of all, I'm not quite sure if it's only drawing on a realist paradigm. I mean, I think there is a certain respect among many politicians on the radical right, not the far right, for Putin as a leader who gets things done, as a leader who is working primarily for his own country, not for the globalists, not for the EU, and so forth. I think that's actually a real sympathy that lies there. As for Norway, I wouldn't say it's, again, not very much of it, because in Norway, as opposed to most other countries in Europe, Euroscepticism basically comes from the left, not from the right. Which, of course, might have something to do with the fact that the Norwegian welfare state is more developed than in many other countries in Europe. So it might actually be somewhat weakened by joining the EU, not strengthened like many other places. So it's not a totally wrong position to have. But again, I wouldn't say that there is very much pro-Kremlin sentiments in Norwegian mainstream politics at all. There are some elements of realism. And of course, I think it's very important to separate between that and actually being pro-Kremlin, because, I mean, Norway's geopolitical location, first of all, and the fact that Norway actually has had a very good relation to Russia basically for centuries. We are neighbors. I think that given this, you can disagree. You can say that these people are wrong, but it's not. I don't want to really to cast any suspicions about people advocating realism in Norway. Now, there is something completely different when you go like Carl I. Hagen and you start to argue that Norway should recognize Crimea as Russian, for instance, or when you, like some members of some leftists have done, start denying that there has been gas attacks in Syria, stuff like that. Or you are like accusing Ukraine of being run by fascists. That's different. But even there, I think that most of these people, there are some exceptions, but I think most of them are actually not doing this because they are deliberately spreading lies, but because they are bought into propaganda. Especially concerning Ukraine.
Sometimes, apart from these very strange information operations like the one that you described about the Norwegian childcare system, sometimes the Kremlin's operations are very, very confusing to me, and I can't really explain what they're for. So, for example, in the beginning of 2017, Norwegian police registered a cyber attack on the center-left Labour Party that was eventually credited to hackers in Russia. Provided the Norwegian police is right, what do you think might be the reason for the cyber attack on the Labour Party? This party was and still is in the opposition, and its main rival, the Conservative Party, was the driving force behind Norway's decision to join the EU sanctions against Russia. So what was the point?
First of all, in Norwegian politics, especially when it comes to foreign affairs, center-right and center-left are basically united. Both of them are pro-NATO. Both of them would probably like to have Norway join the EU. They are in favor of international cooperation. They were in favor of the sanctions against Russia and so forth. So I think that, I don't know, maybe it just turned out that the Labour Party was easier to hack or to break into than others. And maybe also they could have been looking for something that could be used. I mean, now I'm being very, very speculative here, and I'm not even sure that this is something that Russia is aware of. But in Norway, the Labour Party plays a big role in conspiracy culture. They are usually seen as part of the hidden force and so on. Maybe they were looking for something there that they could sort of like, and there's even been some attempts, I could say this first. Unfortunately, over the last years, there has been some politicians from the Progress Party, especially, who has started to make statements or retweet things on Twitter that very much plays into the conspiratorial view of the Labour Party, which I find really, really disgusting, especially because it was exactly those ideas that motivated the killing of, well, I think it was like 90 young people in 2011. And they might have been looking for something that could play into this, or maybe just something else. Maybe just they wanted to see if there was something interesting going on about the EU, for instance, or NATO, or whatever that could be used for something. Or maybe they were just found it easy to break in and decided to take a look. I don't know. Sometimes I also wonder if not some of these hacking operations is just as much about showing that they can do it than anything else.
Well, as far as I can see, the Kremlin's malign influence is present in Norway only to a very limited extent. So that could be a final question in a way. Do you think it is a failure of Putin's regime, or does it actually tell us something about Norway itself? And what would be the lessons from Norway for the European Union in terms of countering malign influence?
First of all, I think Norway is a rather special case because Norway is basically so weak, so little polarized at the moment. Most major parties agree on the big issues, like especially in foreign affairs. There are we do not have a strong far right. We have a stronger far left than we have had in many years, but still, that's a far left that is, I would say, is moving toward the center left, even though they might not be willing to admit it themselves. But if you talk to younger people who are sympathizing or even are active in Rødt, which is the name of the far left party in Norway, you see that they are basically turning it into I would say a left, center-left party, if that makes sense. So because of this, there isn't that much to make use of at the moment, I think, to really influence the population. And also, I mean, sometimes I wonder if we sort of see this like we're saying that, oh, the Kremlin had a big plan for all of this. I'm not sure if they did, but I would say that it's been a failure after overall. I mean, okay, they got Crimea, but they are involved in a war that is expensive also for them in Ukraine. They have sanctions against them. They have basically one close partner now, that's China. Trump is out of office. The same with many other radical right politicians in Europe. So the Russian position is not very good at the moment, I would say. As for what you can learn from Norway, I'm not quite sure, because Norway is a special case due to the low level of polarization here. Sweden is a totally different manner, for instance. But I guess we can say one thing: the mainstream media in Norway is basically doing a pretty good job, I would say. They are they do a very good check about who they quote and who they would not quote. And for instance, very few Kremlin-backed stories have ever found their way into Norwegian mainstream media.
But essentially, then you see, you're saying that there are lessons to be learned from Norway. Well, the lack of polarization, of social polarization. When you have a huge polarization, then it's easy for malign actors such as Putin's Russia or China to exploit. When you don't have this polarization, then you don't have it. And also governance, and also what you said is the responsible media that is doing their fact-checking, that they're doing their balanced reporting. These are lessons which are very important, I think, for even the EU.
Definitely, yeah. If I would say one thing, I might actually point to the media that has been doing a pretty good job here. And of course, also, a welfare state, a social system that is actually preventing a very large level of polarization, obviously.
So thank you very much for this conversation, John and Jon. I wish you all the best in your further research, and I hope we talk again about your work. And I also thank our audience, and if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we upload new episodes of CDI Talks. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.